Welcome back to HOA Karen Tales, everyone. Before a man in a phony HOA police outfit pulled a pistol on me in my driveway over a garbage can. I thought the HOA was irritating. However, he was unaware that I am a real police officer, and I was not going to put up with this. What transpired next completely upended the neighborhood, and the story's title begins as follows. I'm a 35-year-old man who lives in a community where the Homeowners Association HOA had a stronghold on the area when I first moved in. I knew exactly what I was getting myself into when I moved in, and I would hear terrifying tales of HOAs going crazy with rules and fines. I had checked on the neighborhood's website and asked around the area to make sure that I was not getting into anything weird here. The neighbors praised the way, and the website gave me their updated handbook about regulations they had in place. It seemed pretty straightforward, and when I signed for my home, I was excited to be a part of the new neighborhood. A bit of background on me since it comes into play later on in the story. I've been a cop for 10 years. My station is located less than a mile from my house, and I am an officer of the township where my neighborhood is. While I do have days where I have regular work schedule, there can be times when I'm asked to assist with desk work or help cover for other officers that are sick or off on another assignment. This has me coming home in the late evening or sometimes early mornings depending on what it is. I am asked to help out with back to when I first moved in. Sorry if I jump around a little bit. I just wanted to make sure you guys have all the context. The first month was great. I got used to the routine of the neighborhood, learned where I should put my trash, attended my first HOA open forum, which is basically a meeting where the board opens the floor to residents. If they have concerns about a certain rule, or if they notice something that the board did not know about. It was after the forum that I realized that I might have had some rose-tinted glasses on in regards to the HOA board. Most of the things that people brought up during the meeting were the fines. Apparently, they had gotten a bit more intense over the past year and a half, and the community was looking for answers as to what could be done to either reduce the fines or find some sort of compromise for what they were being fined for, and some of the fines sounded bogus to begin with. One couple had gotten a new car and were fined because it was not the correct make and model that the HOA approved of. Another woman was fined because she had bought plants for the inside of her home, but she had left them on her porch when she was unloading her car, and the HOA fined her for having plants on her porch that were not approved. Just a lot of weird things. And by the way, guys, if you live in HOA and never got any weird fines, please let us know in the comments, because I would love to hear about that. Anyway, the HOA board claimed that each fine was legitimate, and not paying the fines could cause them to be doubled or tripled, depending on how long it took for someone to pay them. I openly asked how the HOA was finding out about these violations so quickly, since it didn't seem like the neighbors were snitching on each other, since everyone seemed to be getting different fines at different times during the day. One of the board members told me that the HOA police were the ones who provided those fines. Now, the HOA police was not something mentioned in the handbook or on the HOA website. The people I spoke to when I was looking at the neighborhood did not mention them either, so I thought it seemed to be a newer thing that only a few people had ever gotten to see in action. I did speak to a few people after the forum, and only one gave me some information on what to look out for. I wanted to laugh at the whole thing, but the next forum had more requests for lenient fines and a discussion about whether the HOA could just send out people to police the area to catch someone in the act of doing something in violation of the rules, even though some of the violations were not actual violations, according to some of my neighbors. The HOA police force was a group of 6 people, maybe in their 40s or 50s, who drove around in golf carts and dressed up in uniforms that declared they were the HOA police. One of the officers gave a ticket to a woman who was out gardening to pull weeds because it appeared that she was pulling up bushes that the HOA had planted there when the house was first purchased. She showed the board photos of the bushes, all of which were still in place and not pulled up, and she requested that the fine be waived, but the board turned her request down. I did not speak up much in past forums, but I knew that it was going to be a matter of time before the officers found their way into my part of the neighborhood. When I was home and ready to confront them, I told the board that these fines were getting out of hand. I also mentioned that they should not be referring to their group as police, since, well, these people had not even been trained and were just HOA members on a power trip. I told them that I was not going to pay their fees if fined, and if they had an issue with it, then I would get a lawyer involved. A few of the other neighbors seconded my speech and said that they would not pay any of the tickets they were given. The HOA board did not respond at the meeting, but did send out a neighborhood email that stated that the HOA police would be patrolling more frequently, than anyone who was ticketed that already had a paid fine would have their fines doubled. I made sure to save that email in a folder that I was going to send to a lawyer. I did see the officers on patrol, and they did drive around in a golf cart that had an orange flashing light on top of it. Their uniforms did look like police officer uniforms, but they had patches on the front of their shirts and on their right sleeves that said HOA police. I would usually catch them when I was heading to work or coming back late in the afternoon, but they did not stay too long. I figured that they were waiting to see if I would unpack my car with items that did not fit the HOA standards, but it was just me getting into my car to head to work or getting out of my car after a day on the job. It was only a matter of time before the officers found me when I was doing something they could find me before. I was coming home from an overnight shift, so it was close to 5 o'clock a.m. By the time I returned home, it was still pretty dark. When I pulled into my garage, I realized that it was trash day, and I'd forgotten to move my bins out of my garage to the curb. The truck usually comes around 8 o'clock a.m. As I was moving my bins, I saw a flashing light at the end of my driveway. Two of the HOA officers were leaning up against their golf cart, one already taking out a flashlight and notepad to start writing down a ticket. The one without a notepad came up to me with a flashlight, shining it in my eyes. Another thing I forgot to mention, I did not really have anything to indicate that I was a police officer, unless someone asked to see my badge in addition. I thought that wearing ordinary clothing for the nightly shift and not having anything on my car to identify me as an officer would provide some context. Officer number 1 is a little late to be putting out your bins. Huh? Yes. I returned from work just now. I didn't have time to do it yesterday, so I left the house before I told the neighbors that I wanted to know if anyone else had experienced a similar situation so that we could charge not only the officers but also the HOA board for their assigned time to put them out. So I thought I'd do it now, before the truck arrived. Officer number 1, sir, do you realize that taking one of my trash cans out onto the driveway is against the HOA's trash ordinance? If there has been an update to the handbook regarding the trash, I haven't seen it yet, but I don't think it matters, does it? The sole rule in the HOA handbook about garbage bins is to make sure they are not out before 7:00 p.m. the night before collection and are back off the curb by 10 a.m. Officer number 1 placed the bin back, and you're receiving a ticket. Why? I believe I made it clear in the last forum that I won't pay this ticket you gave me for something like this. There's nothing you need to prove if there wasn't an email, and it's not in the handbook, so just leave your ticket with me and leave. I swear I won't tear it up while you're here. If there was an update to the handbook, that should have been mentioned at the last meeting, or sent out in an email so that everyone would know there wasn't an email. Officer number 1 abruptly held out his hand. Sir, I'm not even that close to you. I'm just moving them down my driveway, when the officer grabbed the right side of his belt and pulled a gun on me. For a moment, I thought I was going crazy. The person I spoke to about the HOA police didn't mention that they were carrying guns. So do you have a permit for that, officer? I'm a member of the HOA police force, and I have every right to carry a gun. The mere fact that you participate in neighborhood watch does not imply that you have a permit to carry a weapon. You are not police enforcement, Jon Snow. Citizens must have a permit in order to carry a firearm. The other officer saw me staring and gave me a shady look. You should listen to him. You wouldn't want him to hurt you, would you? He said. I'm an officer now, and I'm going to have you move back away from me. He holds the gun up so it's aiming for my shoulder. I look past him to see if his partner has anything to say about this. Officer number 1 steps closer to my driveway, and I'm just protecting myself from a rule breaker. No, you're going to move that bin back into your garage, and I might let you kill me. I'm standing up and raising my hands, saying, I'm not moving the bin. Put that down, please, before someone gets hurt. The first officer's hand was shaking, and I still couldn't believe that someone had pulled a gun on me for taking my bins outside of my garage. I looked around at the other houses to see if anyone else was awake and observing this. But the houses were dark, and it was still too early for anyone to be up and looking out their window. I would not be thinking about that, so I just put your bin back. I then discreetly reached into my pocket for my badge, making sure my gun was within reach. I now realized that officer number 1 made a serious error when he stopped delaying and took another step up the driveway. You are aware that this is considered trespassing, right? I have jurisdiction here, and am an officer of the law enforcement agency number 2. The HOA board is behind us, and calling the police won't help me, or I won't call them just yet. I held up my hand with my badge in it. But I'm going to arrest you first for trespassing because you weren't invited to my property, and you're actually threatening to use violence if I don't comply with your demands. I've never seen someone handle a gun without a permit and threaten a police officer so quickly. The officer's gun was plastic, but it was painted to look like a very convincing fake, especially in the early morning light. Officer number 2 dropped her torch and began to tear up officer number 1. Please don't arrest us. Officer number 2, we're just doing our jobs. And I don't think those jobs should include threatening to kill someone because they weren't listening to you. I'm going to ... I have proof of what you attempted to do here because my house has cameras that run down the driveway. We were all going to the station and having a brief conversation when one of the morning shift officers came out with handcuffs and made the 2 officers sit in his cruiser while he took my statement. I told him about the cameras and the circumstances leading up to the threads, and I joined him in the cruiser. A few of the officers made jokes that made me unable to leave my desk, but they calmed down when I explained that I was there to provide a longer statement and what I wanted to charge the 2 officers with. It was a long morning, but by the time the officer drove me home, I had already begun the process of filing charges against these highway officers. I saw another member of the HOA police collecting the golf cart, officer number 3. Do you know what happened to the 2 officers who own this cart? Me? They are down at the police station. Officer number 3. Were they arrested? Yea, trespassed on my property and threatened me with violence because I was taking out my garbage bins. Officer number 3. Oh then well, I will let you off with a warning about the bin in your driveway. I'll report this to my superior officer. I'm now way too tired for this nonsense. You do that? I slept like that until around 5 p.m. when I went into my kitchen to get something to eat. I looked outside to see that I'd forgotten to put my bin back into the garage. There were dozens of pieces of paper attached to it, and I took each of them to look them over. Each one of them was a ticket from another member of the HOA police force with fines that racked up to about $1,500 combined. I wanted to rip up every single ticket, but I didn't. Knowing that this was just more evidence I could use against the HOA, I spent the remainder of the night preparing my case. I had the tickets, the camera footage, and the toy gun at the police station as proof against the officers for trespassing and threatening me. Thinking about how the officers had behaved around me made me wonder if anyone else in the neighborhood had felt threatened like I had, and was afraid to speak up. I decided to use the next forum the HOA held to inquire about that. 2 days after the arrests, the HOA claimed that the officers were simply carrying out their duties and were wrongfully held without proof. I chose to weigh in before the HOA attempted to twist the story. I firmly informed the HOA board and the neighbors present at the meeting that I had been the one to arrest the officers after they threatened to harm me for taking out my trash cans on garbage day. I also described the incident, the evidence I had, and how I had already begun the process of charging them with a crime involvement in allowing people to act as an extension of their office to threaten someone's life. The entire situation made me think that the officers had done something similar in the past, but threatened someone so horribly that they didn't want to come forward to say anything because they were actually afraid. I said. The board informed me that my plans would not stand up in court because I was aware of the rules that came with being in a homeowners association. I informed them that there was no documentation of this police force they established anywhere in their handbook or website, which was information withholding and could be illegal. I left the meeting soon after, but not before inviting my neighbors to visit my house and bring any evidence they had so that we could build a case against the HOA together. I remember waiting for the meeting to end in my living room when my doorbell rang, and when I answered, 10 people were outside my door, one of whom was a board member. OPP. Yes, board members, we are here to share our stories, and I am here to support you in overcoming any obstacles the board may present. I began by talking to each neighbor, some of whom brought thick folders containing fines and letters they had received from the HOA police regarding their wrongdoing. The complaints and fines were all petty, and those who were threatened by the HOA police either faced violence, threats, or had a toy gun pulled on them to intimidate them into silence regarding their fines. One neighbor told me that he had also been threatened with violence while shoveling his walkway following a snowstorm, and, according to the fine, threw snow into an HOA board member's yard. The HOA board member gave her own story, so she was one of the new members of the board, having moved to assist this neighborhood's HOA. When they lost a member, the company that she was a part of owned several HOAs throughout the state. She had seen what the HOA had been doing with the petty fines, and when she tried to bring it up, the rest of the board threatened to her that they would have her fired and ousted from the neighborhood. She is a single mother with 2 young children and didn't want to risk her children's well-being, so she stayed silent but kept tabs on everything. She told me that targeting the HOA would bring the company that owned the HOA into the picture and helped bring to light what she couldn't share without fearing retaliation. I gave everything to my lawyer and let him work his magic. It took a few months, but the members of the neighborhood and I were able to have our day in court. We presented all of the evidence we had compiled showing just how long the HOA board and the HOA police had been treating the community like crap. The threats of violence and death were laid out in the open, and it was satisfying to see the different officers just crumble under the pressure of being questioned as to why they did what they did. The best part was that the company that owned the HOA wanted to testify for our side. The representatives from the board spoke at the trial, wanting to make sure that the behavior that the HOA board had, including the creation of the HOA police force, was not something the company condoned. The times that members of the company came to check on the HOA's progress and offer assistance, there was no mention of the sheer amount of fines, and since the handbook and website were updated regularly with clarifications on routes and requirements, there wasn't cause for them to believe there was anything going on. The representative apologized to us and informed us that no matter the outcome, action would be taken. The court found the HOA guilty of harassment, extortion, and threatening a police officer, violating the state's laws against imitation firearms. The officers who were arrested received 5-year prison sentences. The HOA board was required to pay a hefty fine to each and every individual they targeted in the neighborhood, and the company dismissed the majority of the HOA board and replaced them with new members. The neighborhood has never been better with more respectable HOAs, but the HOA is still there, and it's much more fair, and neighbors can contest their fines or violations if they believe something unfair is happening. The HOA police were eliminated as soon as the verdict was announced, so there aren't any people patrolling the neighborhood looking for problems to fine people for, and all of the extravagant fines that the previous HOA gave out to the neighbors were dismissed, and everyone has a fresh start. And yes, guys, if you enjoy the HOA stories, please remember to like the video. That really helps me a lot. Thank you so much. The next one is a really satisfying story. Owner fired my dad, and then came asking for work but got denied back in 1997. My stepdad was the operations manager at a company that did telecommunications work. He hired me to work at the company for the summer, but I ended up enjoying the work and made a career out of it. About 4 months into my employment at the company, the owner and my stepdad has a disagreement over something very trivial, and the owner fired my dad. Since he's my stepdad, we have different last names, and I didn't feel like I would get caught up in this issue. I had my own issues with this company as well, mostly not being paid correctly and being denied benefits promised. Ended up working for another 18 months for the company before I left to work for a major telecommunications provider that we had done some work for at the new company. I eventually took a position where I was responsible for hiring contractors, much like the company my dad and I worked for, to do construction. One day, I got a call out of the blue from the owner of the contractor company. He wanted to see if he could be added to my list of approved contractors and hoped we could talk about it over lunch. Usually, a project of this kind would cost between $75,000 and $200,000, and I would work on 20 to 30 projects annually, so it might be a profitable source of income for them. I consented to lunch with a new owner at a fancy restaurant because I've always wanted to try his pitch. He told me about his company's capabilities, how he valued and cared for his employees, and the quality of the work he'd done for other companies. I mentioned that I used to work for his company, but he obviously couldn't remember my name. I also asked him if he remembered the man who hired me, and he said he did when I mentioned that he was my stepdad. I ended the lunch meeting by thanking him for the food and apologizing that my contractor list was full of more qualified contractors, but that I would keep an eye out if something changed. He then clearly remembered my stepdad, and I never heard from him again. Welcome back to HOA, everyone. According to Karen's reports, I thought the HOA was obnoxious until a man in a phony police outfit drew a pistol on me over a garbage can in my driveway. He was unaware that I am a real police officer, and I was not going to tolerate this. Produced with https://kome.ai